Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. This game came out on the Epic Game Store. I have been playing it for a while and it runs okay on the RTX 3060. I actually tried this game before on an RX 6900 XT and it is pretty heavy. It's hard to run, not gonna lie. On a 3060 at 1440p, as you can see now I'm running it. I'm basically running it at the highest settings and I only adjusted the shadows to standard, the shadow quality, and the shadow distance to standard. Everything else is either enabled or set to high. So we are very close to the maximum settings at 1440p, and we have disabled the FPS priority mode. You will experience FPS drops. It doesn't matter which hardware you're playing this on. You can turn on the FPS priority mode, but it doesn't help to fix all the problems. It will not be perfect. I just went ahead and decided to go for image clarity. So this is why I set the game to my optimized settings at 1440p with no resolution scaling. And the main reason I'm making this video is because they added FSR to the newest update. I have mixed feelings about FSR in this game. I don't think it is very effective or very good looking. If you reduce the resolution of the game and you try to upscale it even with FSR, and even worse without FSR as you had to do it before, it just doesn't look good. I'm sorry. So let's go ahead and take a look at the comparisons for FSR. So as the baseline here, on the left we have very high settings, and then on the right side I'm going to be changing the preset. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the picture for you. So here we go. So as you can see, on the left we have very high, and on the right we have FPS priority. And as you can tell, if you set on FPS priority, the image just turns into mush. You know, I mean, there's basically no detail left on the guy's face. I mean, you lose a lot of detail. And in my testing, the FPS priority mode does not change the underlying settings of the game, really. Like you can tell, for example, the shadow detail in the rocks and in the foliage is the same. I mean, it doesn't change the shadow detail. And you know what really changes, the real change here is the resolution of the game. The easiest way to get some FPS back is by setting the FPS priority mode, but of course it looks really poor. I mean, at 1440p, Jesus, I mean, you lose a lot of image quality. But if we look at the performance, you go from 80 FPS to about 100 FPS, right? So you're gaining, of course, some performance, but the image quality just nosedives, you know? Now, one thing that you can do to improve this is turn on FSR. So on the left, I'm going to go from very high to FPS priority plus FSR. There we go. So now on the left, we have FPS priority with FSR, and on the right, we have FPS priority without FSR. And you can see that it is almost a night and day difference. I mean, no doubt about it. If you're going to use FPS priority, you better turn on FSR. I mean, it really improves the image. It goes from being just a mush of pixels with basically no detail to, clawing back some of that detail, especially in the edges. If you look at the edges of the rocks, FSR is very effective at clawing back some of that detail. Now, if you look at our NPC friends, well, not NPC, at our friends over here, we can also see how some detail is brought back, by turning on FSR. We can go ahead and look at her. You can see this is with FSR, without FSR, with FSR, without FSR. So if we look at performance FPS priority mode without FSR, it is basically 100 FPS. With FSR, it's still 100 FPS. So I think if you're going to use that FPS priority mode, you better turn it on. And this is the single easiest way to get your performance back. So we're going to go back on the left to very high, and we're going to go back on the right to FPS priority plus FSR. So here we are comparing the very high setting with full resolution to FPS priority plus FSR. So this is how FPS priority plus FSR compares to the native image. And you can tell, indeed, there is a downgrade in the image quality. But if we look, for example, at stuff like very dark areas of the image, for example, the pants basically look identical to me. It's very hard to tell a difference. And if we look at some close objects, such as these rocks, it is basically the same thing. You're not losing a lot. Now, the problem is when you go a bit further away from the camera, you can see that because you're rendering at a lower resolution, of course, the LOD setting is getting modified, So you lose a lot of detail on the distant objects. You also lose detail, for example, on our party members over here. If we take a look at this guy, you can see immediately how his face is less detailed in the FPS priority plus FSR image. Yes. So if we look at Neon here, you can tell, for example, her hood has less detail on the FPS priority plus FSR image. So this is how it compares to native resolution, the setting FPS priority plus FSR. I think it looks okay. It is usable. And of course, you go from 80 FPS to 100 FPS on traversal. It also helps on the minimums if you're fighting. So if you really don't like the performance you get in native resolution during combat, definitely advise you to set the FPS priority mode and then enable FSR. One thing I want us to look at is the different resolution scaling options. So if we take a look at the very high preset with 70% resolution scale and FSR, we can see that it looks very similar to the FPS priority mode. And this is no accident, because if we go ahead and we compare 70% resolution scale to FPS priority mode with FSR, it is basically the same thing. You can see it is actually exactly the same. If you take a look at the rocks, for example, it is reconstructed exactly the same with FSR, and the detail on the characters is also exactly the same in both settings. If we take a look at the performance also, they're basically matched, 100 FPS. So the FPS priority setting is only changing the resolution scale. Now, if we go back to native resolution and we lower a little more, for example, 60% resolution scaling, here you can really tell that the resolution is way lower, even with FSR. The detail on the face is very soft. You can barely see the eyes. And if we take a look at our friends over here, they're really not looking good. It starts to look more like mush. Like if you look at the belt basically has no detail on this character. And of course we have the performance setting, which is 50%. And I mean, this is just, it's horrible. I mean, I would not advise you to play with 50% resolution scaling. It's really bad looking. If we take a look at the Jack over here, You can see all that detail is lost, you know. It's all blended together and then sharpened over with FSR. It doesn't look good. So do not play at 50% resolution scale. Yeah, that's going to be all. If you thought this was helpful, let me know. I'm going to try to test FSR in some other games. And yeah, see you guys later. Bye.